Welcome to the Rooted in the Word podcast. I'm Rob Armstrong, the pastor here at Harrisburg Baptist Church, and we're talking today about passing the baton of faithfulness. Now, I'm about to head out on a mission trip to London, England, and where we're going to be sharing the gospel with college students on multiple university campuses. And while we're there sharing the gospel with them, one of the things that we have learned in our process of preparation and having been there in the last few months before on another trip is there is an absence of the gospel in London, England. There are generations of students, generations of young adults that have no concept of the gospel, which is hard to imagine when you think about the fact that our country, founded largely by Christians coming from England, and now England has very little of the gospel amongst its people. But while I'm reading this week, as we read through and begin to think about God, and especially in the book of Deuteronomy, when God is telling the Israelites to pass on the gospel, he tells them, one, love him with their heart, soul, their minds, their strengths, to basically to love him with all that they are and all that they have. And then he tells them in their homes, in their day-to-day goings, in their rising, in their going to sleep, in their life together, they are to take what God has done for them and to pass it from one generation to the next, and to continue that tradition of passing on the remembrance of all that God has done for them. And they struggled with that as a people. And unfortunately, we often struggle with that as a people. But we are called, as God's people, one, to love him, but two, we are called to pass on the gospel, to pass on the remembrance of what God has done, to bind it on ourselves, to see it, to speak of it, to remember it. And so there's some practical things that I've thought about this morning and wanted to share with you in our Rooted podcast this week is, practically speaking, in our homes, we should be reminding one another of the gospel. So there's a level of decorating in our homes that would be reminding us of the gospel. I know that in our home, we have in almost every spot in the house, when you look, you will see some remembrance of what God has done for us, whether it's a cross, whether it's scripture in art form. We have been very intentional in our home to make sure that God's work and his word is present, even in our home. As we go about our lives, we are able to be reminded of his goodness and his love for us. There's also the reality that we should speak often of what God has done for us. One of the things that I do as a pastor is meet with people as they join our church and they share their testimonies, and we listen to one another and we share what God's doing in our lives. And on many occasions, I sit with parents and their children are present as mom and dad begin to share their story of salvation and what God has done for them. And over the years, I have seen many children as they watch in wonder while mom and dad share the testimony of how God saved them and how God has worked in their lives since. And it's the first time that many children have heard their parents talk about when God saved them and how God has worked in their lives. And so that's maybe the second thing that I would encourage us to do in light of what we see in Deuteronomy chapter 6, is we should tell one another what God has done, especially our children. So if you have children in your home, sit them down and talk to them about when God saved you, and tell them the story of your salvation and conversion. Tell them the stories of how God has been faithful in your home and in your life from the moment that he saved you all the way up until now. And let your children know of what God has done, and then encourage your children to share the same stories, to talk about what God's doing in their life, and to talk about how God has been faithful in their lives. And in the process of talking about what he's done for you, go to scripture and read of his saving work through Christ. Read of God's grace and his love for us, and do what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 6. Be mindful of what he has done. Speak of what he has done. Remind yourself around your home. And then maybe a third piece of practical advice that I would give you is, where you work, in your car, on your person, in some way, find a way to remind yourself of what God has done. whether that's a bracelet, whether that's a screensaver on your phone, some kind of scripture. I know that one of the things that I've seen that I think is pretty effective, if you're up for it, is there's some temporary tattoos even that are scripture memory tools that have just kind of maybe parts of a verse that just kind of you stick somewhere, and some stickers that I've seen some students using. But find a way to put the reminder of God's work in front of you. Whether that's a 3x5 card, a Post-it note, a screensaver, something on your watch face, a bracelet, a rubber band around your wrist, something that when you see it, it helps you to remember of what God has done for you and God's love for you. Now listen, this podcast is a little shorter than normal because it's been a busy week in getting ready to head to London and share the gospel with college students. But what I plan on doing is sending some more words, some more rooted moments as we'll be in England, and I expect there to be some things that come to mind related to our passages. So we're going to do a couple of extra installments this week. So pay attention for those and look for those. And if you haven't liked or subscribed to us on YouTube, go and do that. And if you're listening to us on an audio platform, we hope that you continue to subscribe and take notifications when these drop. But I'll be coming to you from London here in the very near future. And as you go through this week, it's my hope and my prayer that you will stay rooted in the Word.